and welcome to Grandad's Reviews. Today I'm going to answer a question that was left in one of the comments on one of my previous videos, and that was, can I show how you can do zone focusing on the Fuji X cameras? What I'd like to do for a start is to just do a short explanation of what zone focusing is and how it can be useful. Now, zone focusing is usually used with street photography and landscape, but you can use it in any situation. So what I'm going to do is first have a look at what zone focusing is, and for that I'm going to demonstrate on an old Minolta film camera, just to give you an idea of what the technique is and how you can use it. So let's have a look at the camera. So here we have the lens markings on a Minolta 45mm, and we'll just go over what zone focusing is. So now let's say you're out doing street photography and you want to quickly snap people either from the hip or without actually bringing the camera up to your eye. What you can do is, first off, we'll set what aperture you want to use. So in this case we'll set f8, and then you'll decide on the distance that you want to capture the scene in. Say if you want to get everything all the way up to infinity, and as you can see we've got another row of aperture numbers here, and then we've got the focusing scale. So if we move infinity up to f8, and then we see the f8 here, that means that everything from just under 15 foot to infinity will be in focus. Now if you didn't need to you knew you weren't photographing anything over infinity and you wanted them a bit closer, you could move, let's say, the 15 foot to the f8, then everything just over 7 foot to 15 foot should be in focus. Now your actual focusing point, so let's put the focusing point at 15 feet. So at 15 feet you've got critical focus, but you've got a bit of leeway either side of that, and that is what this is showing. So at 15, if you critical focus at 15 feet, you can see that f8 is there and f8 is there. So if you're going to do it for meters, so everything from 3 meters to 10 meters would be in focus. Again, if you put infinity there, you're looking probably at 20 feet in critical focus, and everything from just before 15 feet to infinity is in acceptable focus. But you can bring that down to anything. So if you were going to be running close, you could set your focusing point to 7 feet, and then you've got f8 there, which is like 3 meters, so say 9 feet. And your f8 there, we're looking probably 5 feet, so between 5 feet and 9 feet will be in acceptable focus, and your 7 foot will be in critical focus. So that is what zone focusing is. And if you're doing landscape, say, you could drop this down to f16, put your infinity at f16, and then everything from 7 foot to infinity should be in focus. And that's how your zone focusing works, and how you set it up on these cameras here with the scale. But unfortunately the Fuji lenses don't come with this scale, so we have to do it slightly different. So let's have a look at the Fuji lens. Now let's have a look at the Fuji. Now most of Fuji's lenses don't have those same markings that's on that older lens. 2 do, and that's the 16mm 1.4 and the 23mm 1.4, and that's the only 2 that I know of at this moment. So we have to do it slightly different with these. So what we'll do is, first off, set up the menus so we can use this correctly. So we go into the menu, and in the MF settings, we come down to focus check. Now you want to turn that off for a start, and then come down to depth of field scale and change that to film format basis, because that will give us a bigger reading on the scale when we get to it. Next we want to come down to the spanner, then screen setup, then all the way down to display custom settings, and we need to switch on AF distance indicator and MF distance indicator. So then when we come out, if we're in AF, we've got at the bottom of the screen a distance scale. So if we focus on something, you'll see the white dot come up to the scale. If I focus right over there, and what you'll also notice is a blue line either side of that dot, and that's your depth of field that the camera is saying you'll get at that aperture. So if I change the aperture to f16, let's say, and focus on that same bit, you'll see we've got a wide blue that's going from just over 30 feet down to 7 feet. So that's our zone of focus. Of course, because I'm using the button, that will change all the time. And you want to say, well, why don't I just use the autofocus? If you're doing street photography and you want to do it from the hip, you're not going to be certain that square is going to be on what you want to focus on. So if you can set up a zone, you don't have to worry about that. You can just take the shot. So what we need to do is change your focusing method to manual, and then use the AF lock button to lock the autofocus on that spot. We've then got on our scale the blue line, and at f16 we've got from 7 foot to 30 foot at that distance that I've just focused on. If I focus a bit closer, let's say here, as you can see, the distance has now changed from 3 foot to 5 foot. So that's our zone. So in this manner, if you have an idea of where your subjects most likely are going to be, or if you're across from the street, take an initial lock on a subject or static object at the correct distance. You'll see how much zone of focus you've got. So if I take it onto there, so I've got that distance, say that was where I wanted the main subject to be. I've got 15 foot to just over 5 foot. So at about 8 to 9 foot away, I'll be critical, and everything up to 5 foot will be acceptable, and up to 15 foot will be acceptable. If you think, well, that's too much, we can then change the aperture, and you'll see that blue line change. So if we now go to f8, we're now at 7 foot to just over 10 foot. So we can vary that zone of focus. Now obviously you could manual focus as well. So you could set your manual focus at 10 foot, and then you'll know that everything at f8 between say 7 and 15 foot will be in focus. So that's one other way of doing it. Another way is to pick your aperture and turn your focus until that blue line hits infinity, and then we know we've got focus just over 15 foot to infinity at f8. So if I take that to f16, we can move our focus to the blue line. It's at infinity, and now we've got 10 foot to infinity at f16. Obviously you're going to have to adjust the apertures to get the shutter speed that you require for the actual shot. But that's the two ways you can do it, either using the manual focus system, or if you want to use the autofocus, make it lock on, and you'll see what your depth of field is going to be, lock it onto that, and just flick it over to manual and lock it into place. Or you could go into the menus and remove the shutter button from the focusing system, so it doesn't do the focus and just the AF lock button does the focus. Then you can leave it in autofocus and do the same thing. But the easiest way is to flick it over to manual focus, use the AF lock button, get your distance you want critical focus, then look at your blue line and then decide what aperture you require to get a bit of zone focus either side, and then you can just from the hip just take a shot in the general direction and you're more than likely to get your subject into focus. So that's the way you can do it on Fuji cameras. Obviously if you've got the 16mm or the 23mm 1.4, you've got the markings on the lens and you can actually set it via that. But otherwise you've got to use the scales on the back on the screen. It also comes up in the viewfinder. And you can do this with your zoom lenses or any other lenses. Now, another way of using it is to have a manual focus vintage lens on and you use the same markings that's on that lens. But a word of warning on that, if you use some of the cheaper adapters, the photodiox or the K&F, they're not made perfectly. If you're focusing through the viewfinder, that's fine because you're focusing and that's fine. But if you're doing zone focusing with those, you may find that they don't line up quite correctly. So you're just going to have to do a bit of trial and error so that you know where the exact marks line up. So measure from focal plane of the camera. There's a mark on here. Put it on a tripod. Measure from there, say 10 foot. Make a mark. Have someone stand there. Focus your vintage lens and see if 10 foot comes up on the scale or how far you're out. And then just make that adjustment for when you're doing your zone focusing. But it's easy enough to do. So that's zone focusing and zone focusing with Fuji cameras. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. If you want to see more videos like this, hit the subscribe button. If you're not notified, hit that bell button. Till next time, see you later.